Washington Journal continues.
We want to welcome Dr. Gavin Macgregor-Skinner. He is an expert on infectious disease. He's affiliated with Penn State and Harvard. He's also the Global Projects Manager for the Elizabeth R. Griffin Foundation. Good morning. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning, Steve.
What is Zika?
Zika virus is a virus that's transmitted by mosquitoes. And this has been really interesting. There are a number of diseases transmitted by mosquitoes. We know about malaria. We know about dengue, we know about chikungunya, yellow fever. We even had West Nile virus. Remember West Nile virus went right across all the states here, and we had that West Nile virus outbreak a few years ago. So there are a number of diseases that are transmitted by Zika virus. We've known about Zika virus and mosquitoes since 1947, but it's never been a big deal until very recently.
Why?
Well, very recently in Brazil, and this is in the last 12 months, we've started to hear about an increase in cases of Zika virus, we know that Zika virus was a virus that was found since 1947, first found in Uganda. It had been in Africa, it had been in Asia, it had been in the South Pacific Islands, but it had never been found in the Western Hemisphere, North America, South America, until last year when it was reported by the Brazilian government that they'd had an increase, well, actually found Zika virus in patients, and then they were finding this explosive increase of cases across the country. And what we've seen now, we've seen Zika virus spread from Brazil, and it may have been related to a large gathering of event like the World Cup soccer event, for example. That may have brought it in. But we've now seen it spread to very, very quickly, and we've reported patients and cases and mosquitoes spreading Zika virus in 46 countries in less than 12 months.
And so much talk about we'll come up with a vaccine, and yet you say that's not what's necessary.
No, it's often in public health. And again, what's important about Zika virus is that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, started to alerting the world about Zika virus back in January. The Brazilian government reported in May of 2015. The World Health Organization on the 1st of February announced this as a public health emergency of international concern. It doesn't get any higher than that. And whenever we have these really large important events like Ebola and Zika, the first thing we run to is, where's the vaccine? This is about human behavior, just like it was for Ebola.
So what can be done for those who are going to Brazil or to the Caribbean or other parts of the world?
Well, it's really important to know that we've been going to these countries for years where there's been malaria transmitted by mosquitoes. There's been dengue and chikungunya fever and yellow fever transmitted by mosquitoes. And for years, the US State Department, the US Centers for Disease Control, the World Health Organization, and ministries of health throughout many countries have said you need to use insect repellent. You need to keep to wear clothing that covers up and doesn't leave any bare skin. If a particular mosquito bites at night, you sleep under a bed net. You need to be aware that there are ways to control mosquito populations. So now we're dealing with a new emerged infectious disease, the Zika virus, in the Western Hemisphere. It's spread by mosquitoes, and we've got to go back to those same principles of how do we stop being bitten by a mosquito.
And this is the map from the CDC, Mexico, Central and South America. You mentioned Brazil, the Caribbean, the Olympics in South America. What impact, if any, would it have on the athletes in Rio de Janeiro?
Well, it's an interesting disease, Zika virus. Again, the US government has already put out a travel health notice, like they do for every country in the world, for the Olympics. And that travel health notice that's come out from the US government through the Center for Disease Control tells you, make sure you're up for your vaccines. You get for yellow fever, and ensure that you're protected from mosquitoes. Ensure that if you're going to an area where there's malaria, that you take malaria prophylaxis. Ensure that you may get traveller's diarrhea, that you have some medicine for that as well. So within that travel health notice, we're now putting Zika virus there and saying, don't take precautions. Use insect repellent like DEET. Apply it regularly throughout the day. Wear clothing that covers up your skin. Try not to get bitten by mosquitoes. But also there's all that other part of what can be done, like a comprehensive mosquito control or management program.
This is a map of the U.S. where the Zika virus has shown up in different parts of the country. How has it moved into the U.S. and why does it live in the male sperm?
Okay, there's a couple of definitions that people have to understand that we've seen being mentioned that I think people really aren't sure what it means. There's local transmission, And local transmission of a mosquito-borne infection like malaria or dengue or Zika virus or chikungunya means that a mosquito, and it's the female mosquito, comes along and bites someone with the disease, an infection, so they have the virus in their blood. Then that virus gets in the mosquito. It takes time for it to go through the body of the mosquito into the salivary glands of the mosquito, and then they go and bite someone else and they transmit the virus through the saliva of the mosquito. That's local transmission. We haven't had local transmission here in the US. What we've had is people that travel down to South America, Central America and the Caribbean countries, and again the US government estimates there's about 40 million people that do that a year. There's been a very small number of people, and I think we're at about 147 cases of known Zika virus, the CDC mentioned on Friday, that have travelled down, been bitten by a mosquito in those countries, and they've come back and we've found that they have either developed symptoms and they've been diagnosed with a lab test.
Our phone lines are open and we are dividing our lines regionally. 202, the area code 748-8000 for those of you who live here in the East or Central time zones. And if you're out west, the number to call is 202-748-8001. If you have the Zika virus, what are the symptoms? And how long does it last?
That's a great question, Steve, because the majority of the people will never get symptoms. They will never know. It's like if we said to all the viewers this morning, who's watching this show right now and knows they had Zika virus? The majority would never know they had the virus. And there's some people, and then again there's been estimates that maybe only about 20%, so about 1 in 5 will actually develop symptoms. They're going to get fever. But how many other diseases have fever? A lot. They'll get maybe some joint pain, headaches, muscle pain. They'll get a rash. They could get some conjunctivitis, so they'll have redness around the eyes. Those symptoms can last anywhere up to 7 to 10 days. We are now looking at the public health messages that have come out, and we're saying, look, if you've travelled down to these countries where there is known Zika virus, then you need to protect yourself from mosquito bites for about 30 days. But we've also found something really interesting. We've found Zika virus in semen. And we've also now got evidence here in the US that a man has travelled to a country with Zika virus, come back, and through having sex has passed on that virus to someone who's never left the country. And so we're now seeing sexual transmission. And that's now adding another challenge to what we're trying to deal with.
Our guest is Dr. Gavin Macgregor-Skinner. He's an expert on infectious diseases, affiliated with both Penn State and Harvard Medical. Sonia is joining us from Harrodsburg, Kentucky. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm very troubled by this. I have a daughter of childbearing age, and right now, it's still cold down here, in Kentucky and other places. But, we have our share of mosquitoes, and I just want to know why we cannot put travel restrictions, test people. I know the volume, I understand, but of the people traveling. But we must keep this from getting into our mosquito population.
Thank you, Sonia. We'll get a response.
Really good question, Sonia. And again, what we need to be talking about, and again, the media and the press and even the experts haven't done a lot of talking about this. What we need is a comprehensive management system which brings in a lot of subject matter experts, but just looks at how to manage the mosquitoes, but also how to do risk assessments, surveillance, how do doctors and nurses work with those insect control experts, how do we work, how do we use maps, and this is really important. And you've raised a really interesting point here, Sonia. One of the concerns that I have as a public health expert is that we've covered, on the maps that the US government have put out, we've coloured the whole country of Brazil red. And Brazil's a really large country, and we know that the risk is not the same throughout the whole country. So what we need to do, Sonia, is use the tools that we have in 2016 to actually identify where those local populations of mosquitoes exist, where there is risk, where there are patients reporting or being tested by the lab, so they're reporting the symptoms of Zika virus and they're being laboratory confirmed, actually put them on a map and start to do some risk assessments to say it's not the whole country, it's certain areas. Because there's some really good mosquito programs going here in the US. We've dealt with this before. We're very good at this, and we can protect our community, and we need to be showing the community that there is very low risk because of what we do every day.
Here's that map that you were referring to, courtesy of the CDC. It's available online at cdc.gov. And there's a tweet from Didi who says, are these people being quarantined, those with the Zika virus?
Didi, yeah? No, Didi, they're not being quarantined, and I'll tell you why they're not being quarantined, is because this disease, really, in the majority of people, you won't see any symptoms. And so so you'll see a few symptoms. You'll see the rash, you'll see the headache, you'll see the conjunctivitis, the red eyes, you'll see some fever, and that's very mild. We don't even know, and we haven't had any evidence in previous outbreaks from this disease we've known since 1947 that this causes death. So this is a very mild disease, but it's important. You've raised a really important point. Anyone who's travelled back to South America, Central America, the Caribbean islands, or any of the other 46 countries where we know there's now local transmission, when you come back, we need to know where you are so that we can advise you appropriately. Stay in air-conditioned rooms, apply insect repellent, don't get bitten by mosquitoes, but also so that local health authorities can go out to those areas and do a risk assessment and then create a surveillance program looking at the mosquitoes and anyone else in that neighbourhood, because these mosquitoes don't fly very far.
Our guest has studied at the University of Queensland in Australia, also at the University of London and Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Pat is joining us from Keyport, New Jersey. Good morning.
Good morning. Two questions. You say this is a very mild disease, so I assume this means people will recover from it and they'll go about their lives. But the danger I hear about in the U.S. is to pregnant women, that this causes birth defects. Are we going to have to do screening of blood? Are we going to do stuff like we had to do with the AIDS virus to prevent this from spreading through the population to people who never come in contact with the mosquito?
Thank you, Pat.
Pat, great question, and already we've seen the blood bank organisations, not just here in the US, but in Canada, in England and other countries, say that we're going to have to screen the blood for the Zika virus. There's also the Centre for Disease Control here in the US has said, very much the same as if you've gone to a country where there's malaria. Again, malaria is a parasite that's transmitted by mosquitoes. If you've gone to a country where there's malaria, the advisory is you don't go and donate blood, after you come back, up to 12 months. That same information is being put out there right now, Pat, that if you've travelled down to any of these countries, then you don't go and donate blood. But it's very important because a lot of the people who travel down here won't have those symptoms and they won't know whether the virus was in their blood. And so it's really important that we start to set up those screening approaches and procedures and methodologies that we have. We use the technology we have now, but also we give good advice. And this is really challenging, Pat, because if we have 40 million people from the US that travel to these countries every year, what's the best way to deliver this information? And that's what we've got to be looking at right now.
Our conversation with Dr. Gavin Macgregor-Skinner. What is the Elizabeth Griffin Foundation?
The Elizabeth R. Griffin Foundation is based in Tennessee. It was established in 1999 after Beth Griffin died from a very rare disease called B virus. And Beth got this from working with monkeys in a research facility. But she was misdiagnosed and there was a lot of challenges because B virus is really rare. When the Elizabeth R. Griffin was formed, we said, our work as a group of professionals, multidisciplinary professionals, there'll be no more Beth Griffins. So we work with these rare diseases like Zika every day, ensuring that we keep the public safe, but also the hospital staff and the laboratory staff safe, working with highly infectious diseases.
This from Victor saying, how do you convince anyone of childbearing age to attend the Olympics with the Zika virus down there?
It's a really good question, Victor. And again, there is a travel advisory. And again, through the work that I do through the Elizabeth R. Griffin Foundation, we're getting lots of questions from US companies. We're getting lots of questions from the tourism industry, the hotel industry. We're getting questions from US companies that are saying, hang on, we have US women in these countries. They're aged between 20 and 30, childbearing age. Should we send them all back to the US? And no, we shouldn't. Again, we don't want the economic effect to be staggering like some people are saying could happen, and we saw happen with the Ebola outbreak in West Africa just recently. So it's really important that we use the science and the knowledge that we have now to take all the precautions we can to avoid getting bitten by mosquitoes. We work with the experts in a comprehensive mosquito management program to decrease the number of mosquitoes, and we can do that very effectively. We've shown that for malaria, dengue, chikungunya, yellow fever and other diseases. And so again, it's a whole community approach of all the experts coming together and coming up with a comprehensive plan that they implement to protect the health of the population, but also to give good advice to people like females that are of reproductive age.
But some athletes, including Hope Zolo, saying may not attend because of the Zika virus. This is a story from the Washington Post.
And again, that's a really good question now, Steve, but we're 6 months out. And there's a lot we can do 6 months out. We have the technology to do residual spraying, targeted, strategic residual spraying for these mosquito populations. And this is not every day. You spray, the residual spraying stays there. You've seen mosquitoes in your house. They don't fly very far. After they've had a blood meal, they're big and fat. They don't fly even as far as they did when they were skinny before their blood meal. They stay locally. So if we know these mosquitoes are there locally, then we attack them. We target them locally. Then we set up a risk assessment and a surveillance system to ensure those mosquito population has decreased. We give good advice. And I just saw the other day where we're talking about in the Olympic Village, are there screens on the windows and the doors? It's a good question, because if there's not, you've got to put them on there now. Are the athletes going to have air-conditioned rooms? If they're not, let's get some air-conditioning units out there. What advice are we giving the athletes and the visitors about applying insect repellent?
So you're not worried. If you were traveling to South America, to the Caribbean, you would continue with your plans?
Yes, I would.
Paul is joining us from Bristol, England. This program is carried on the BBC Parliament channel, so we welcome those watching across the pond. Paul, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, you guys. How are you going?
Good, thank you, Paul.
Fine. Thanks for joining in on the conversation on a Sunday afternoon.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. People just talk about the Zika virus. Just one very brief point I'd like to make before I ask the question, if I may. Just can we please reinforce to people that viruses cannot be treated by antibiotics, and it's dangerous to build up or to start taking antibiotics unnecessarily, because a lot of people do that when, with things like the flu, etc. But my point to Gavin is in relation to the Olympics. Now, we know that viruses can, through genetic mutation, become people-to-people infection rates can happen because a mutation has taken place. Now, I know that London, for example, got a massive financial boost because of the Olympics, but surely it doesn't make sense when you've got the Zika virus happening for the Olympics to go ahead. And I really think that if it's all about if it's a financial decision why the Olympics isn't going ahead, then I think that's a really bad. Then I think that's a really bad decision. I think that really we need to have a situation where the Olympics is at least put on hold, maybe, or is cancelled. Maybe next year. It can be held next year, if not this year. And that way it'll prevent people from coming all over the planet whose genetics even might be slightly different, because each human being, our genetics is slightly different depending on where we come from, giving the necessary gene to the virus to then become a person-to-person transmittal viral disease.
Paul, thanks for making that point. We'll get a response.
That's a good point, Paul. But again, I live in the 21st century. This is 2016. And to get back to your point, we know the Olympics are going to be held from August 5th to August 21st, 2016 in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Then the Paralympic Games, and no one's really talked about this. The Paralympic Games are then being held in Brazil from September 7th to September 18, 2016. We have 6 months. With the technology, the science, and again, there's lots of questions we don't understand about Zika, but again, looking at the travel health notices that we do for large events, whether it be the World Cup football tournament, whether it be the Olympics, whether it be the cricket, whether it be the rugby, wherever you get large crowds of people, public health experts put out travel health notices. So even the travel health notice for Brazil right now, again, it has, hepatitis A, typhoid, hepatitis B, yellow fever. Ensure your vaccinations are up to date. Ensure that you have routine vaccinations for measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, polio, flu and chickenpox. We would not cancel the Olympics for any of those diseases because we make the recommendation. But we also know there's malaria down there. There's dengue down there. We've always known it's dengue and malaria have been in these countries like Brazil for many, many years. That's not a reason to cancel the Olympics. Zika virus has caught us by surprise. The public health community, the colleagues that I work with, it's caught us by surprise. It has spread at a staggering rate to 46 countries. That caused us by surprise. What I'm trying to say now is we have the technology, we have the expertise. We just have to mobilise the people we need to answer the questions we have and the challenges we have. We have techniques developed for years on how to decrease and reduce the number of mosquito population and go back. You know, I come from a country that has high levels of skin cancer. Go to any school in Australia and they'll tell you to slip, slop, slap. And they'll tell you to put on a hat, put on clothing that covers up your skin, and every 2 hours put on sunscreen. We're going to have to educate the population on how to protect themselves from mosquito bites, something similar to that.
Slip, slop, slap?
That's right.
Let me get your reaction to Dr. Anthony Fauci. He is in charge of the allergy and infectious diseases at NIH, and we covered a hearing this past week in which he talked about how to treat this condition here in the U.S. and research that could be applied elsewhere in the world. Here's a portion.
One of the most important things we do is to develop vaccines, as we've done for so many other of these emerging threats. The candidates you see on the slide, the two marked with red, are the two that are most advanced and are essentially ready to go into early trials. We're partnering with our industrial colleagues, and right now, let me give you an example of why it's important to have done decades of research in other diseases that gives us a head start. Years ago, we developed a vaccine for West Nile virus. We went into phase 1. It was shown to be safe, and it was shown to induce an immune response that you would predict would be protective. We didn't have any industrial partners, so we never made it to the advanced development. But we used that platform to develop now a Zika vaccine that is essentially ready to go in the development of the early preclinical studies. And it really is a very interesting phenomenon. We took what's called a DNA piece of genes, and we stuck in it a West Nile gene to express a protein of West Nile. So all we did this time was take that same platform, take out the West Nile gene, and stick in the Zika gene. So right now we're making this vaccine, and we predict it will be ready to go into phase 1 trial by the summer of this year, and hopefully by the end of 2016 we'll have enough information to decide if we can even go further to an advanced trial, and I'll be happy to discuss that during the question period. Finally, when one looks at therapy, we're doing screening of drugs of known activity against certain of these viruses, as well as new drugs that have potential activity. This is a very important issue, and we are now partnering with many of our industrial and biotech partners to do this.
Just a portion of the testimony by Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's a frequent guest on this network. He's with NIH. And Dr. Gavin Macgregor-Skinner, your reaction to what he said about treatment options?
Oh, what Dr. Fauci said about a vaccine development for me is personally very exciting. The science behind vaccine development. But it takes time, Steve. It takes a long time. What we do in public health, interventions like in an emergency like this, we use all the tools in the toolbox. So again, we've just mentioned the slip, slop, slap campaign that the Australian government did for many years for skin cancer. That's a reality of living in a country like Australia. Now we've got 46 countries with local transmission of Zika virus. We have to educate the public. We have to educate the public of how to avoid mosquito bites. Imagine if you went down there and booked into your vacation and got into the hotel, checked in. The first thing you should be hearing when you check in is, and why you're here in the hotel's been managing mosquito population with a comprehensive program. That's great, but they're going to tell you, cover up your skin, apply DEET, or here's the list of insect repellents to use. Be very careful. I mean, ensure you do that. When do you put the sunscreen on and the insect repellent on? Well, you put the sunscreen on first, and then you put the insect repellent on second, and you regularly apply the insect repellent throughout the day. And we can do that, and that's education that we have to get to hundreds of thousands, even millions and millions of people. We have to go to scale on that, and we don't have that campaign in place at the moment.
Let's go to Sean, who's been patient from Providence, Rhode Island. Thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Couple of comments, Steve. I appreciate getting on. C-SPAN is great, and you're very cool, which is wonderful. You should notify the caller how long they'll have to wait, because you could pass out while waiting.
I'm sorry about that, but thank you.
My observations are, I happen to have a degree in public health, which I haven't used in a while, but I think the discussant's position is really lacking in some important information. For one, he doesn't mention microcephaly, which is an outcome of this disease, which he's talking about as being mild and unnoticed by lots of people. So you've got to think from a public health and a political standpoint, you've got to think of the implications of a phenomenon that has apparently caused so many women the big-time hassles in Brazil. So that's one issue. The second is there are cases reported of sexual transmission, which he seems to have omitted completely in his discussion. And the third is he didn't seem to focus on the vaccine, whereas Fauci talks about the vaccine. And the public health community should certainly have the brain power, which they seemingly don't, to have everything, as Fauci implied, that there is a strategy and you have to have notification promptly of any of these outbreaks so that you could crank up the system and get going with the vaccine strategy, which apparently has been used with certain kinds of diseases. But I think that And mostly public health and anything, if you think of automobile safety, you design the car better, you design the roads better, so that you don't put the responsibility on drivers being intelligent, sensible people, because they're not. And so you really need a creative and intelligent, thoughtful strategy for dealing with these kinds of emergent phenomena that occur periodically, maybe more frequently now than ever, who knows. But so I don't think that his and you got to remember, by the way, that athletes, I was one in college, they take their clothes off, they run, they take their sweats off before an event. So the concept of protective layers and so forth doesn't really apply so well because people are not going to act that way. So
John,
those
real
are my
quickly,
comments and questions.
What's your background again?
I'm a clinical psychologist with a PhD and an MPH.
Okay. Thank you, from Providence, Rhode Island.
Yeah, and they're good questions, Steve, and we're going to get to that right now. Again, with Dr. Fauci talked about a vaccine. If that vaccine goes through all the clinical trials, the tests that we need to ensure that it's both effective and safe, it has to be. We have to ensure the vaccines are safe. Then we have to have the production facilities to produce millions of vaccines. Then we have to have the system in place, the public health system in place, to go out with nurses and physicians and community health workers to deliver the vaccine. The population of Brazil, 200 million people. Look at the time it would take, and now we've got Zika in 46 countries, to go through the science, the research, to get a vaccine that goes through the approval process. Then we have to produce that vaccine, then we have to deliver that vaccine. So while we're waiting, and again, there's nothing wrong with developing the vaccine, but while we're waiting for the vaccine to develop, there's a lot of things we could do.
Elfrida joining us from California. Good morning. You're next.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I have a question. After listening to this last gentleman on the report, I am really, really concerned. Are immigrants being screened for the Zika virus?
No, they're not. And they're not being screened because what we're doing at the moment, and again, the US government's doing this, they've handed out the travel health notices, the advisories. They're advising women of childbearing age or those that are pregnant not to travel to these countries. Look at the sheer number. If as estimates have shown that we've got 40 million people that live here in the US or travelling down to these countries every year. Again, we found this with Ebola. Trying to screen and test everyone that comes in. We don't have the laboratory capacities today. So when the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, announced early in February that these travel advisories were going to be put in place, they announced there was only 5 laboratories in the country, 4 public health labs and 1 laboratory at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, could actually test for Zika. What the Center for Disease Control has been doing in recent weeks is producing more of those tests, those reagents that they need to send out to labs, and that takes time. So at the moment they're working on getting 100,000 tests ready. That would only allow us to do 100,000 tests. So we don't have in place right now, because this Zika disease caught us by surprise to diagnose everyone that we'd want to diagnose. And then, again, but there's still a lot of research going on. And some of the research going on at the moment, which is very exciting, is where they were developing a point-of-care test that you could use at an airport, at a clinic, or in a hospital, and have a result very quickly. But again, that's not commercially available just yet.
I want to welcome our listeners not only on C-SPAN Radio, but on Sirius XM Channel 124, the POTUS channel, which carries the Washington Journal every Sunday morning from 7 to 10 Eastern Time. Our guest is Dr. Gavin Macgregor-Skinner. We're talking about the Zika virus. He's an expert in infectious diseases. And our next caller is from Tenafly, New Jersey. Tom, good morning.
I want to compliment Dr. Skinner. I'd like to have a Dr. Skinner at every airport, at every blood bank, at every position that could possibly offer control. His enthusiasm is smart. The problem is Brazil, that we're surprised, is not a function of somehow something came out of Zeus. The Zika virus has been identified. It's the frequency of the cases. And the frequency of the cases and the concentration in Brazil does speak a great deal to the Olympic situation, whether it stops or it starts. In fact, I'm not so certain that we're getting accurate data from the Brazilian government or the commercial establishments in Brazil or American establishments as to how frequent the Zika is actually occurring in this Brazilian population of two-thirds of the population of the United States.
How can you respond?
Yeah, that's a very, very good point and a great question. Again, we don't have the resources at the moment to diagnose or to test all 200 million people in Brazil. What we do know is that public health partnerships, public health communication, it's all about trust. It's all about the people. It's about the people that I work with knowing that I'm credible. It's about the people that I'm talking to knowing that they're credible. Collecting data and information has been a real challenge for this because Zika virus appeared and moved so quickly across these countries that the health information management systems in hospitals, in clinics, weren't prepared for a new disease. So what we're seeing that they're putting the Zika cases in under dengue or chikungunya or some other disease because those health information management systems weren't in place to say here's a new disease, but the symptoms of Zika are so similar to dengue and chikungunya that the confusion is there all the time if you're looking for fever, rash, and say some muscle pain and some redness in the eye. So it's really important we look at this, but it's more important that we use maps. Let's use maps at the moment. Instead of colouring in a whole country red, let's use maps to identify where there's local transmission, where patients are reporting symptoms, where there's mosquito management systems and control programs in place so that we can look at this through a lens of risk. And we're not doing that at the moment.
And you're also working with the World Health Organization on this?
Yes, I actually participate on the World Health Organization Risk Communication Working Group, a very large group, great bunch of smart people trying to answer some of the similar questions we're getting today, Steve.
Let's go to Shauna, joining us from Newark, Ohio. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, I was wondering how much is really known about the link between Zika and microcephaly. If the virus was discovered in 1947, why haven't we heard of cases of microcephaly in Africa and other countries up till now? And I just read that a group of Argentine doctors believes that the microcephaly might actually be a result of a larvicide used to control mosquitoes.
Shauna, these are really good points. This is a great question. What makes this Zika outbreak in the Western Hemisphere that started in Brazil and has now gone to 46 countries so extraordinary and so challenging? We've known about Zika virus since 1947. All the previous countries that have reported outbreaks of Zika virus, we've never seen microcephaly. And that's where babies are born with abnormally small-sized heads, and therefore they've got smaller-sized brains, and it can lead to cognitive and neurological problems, but not always. What's really interesting is that when we started looking at the data and the information from Brazil, there's no standardized case definition. What I mean by that, there's no standardized case definition that everyone is using. So there is actually 3 different methods that doctors and nurses in Brazil are using to measure the circumference of their head. All that data is available. What we need to do is to mobilize the public health community, the research community, in a way that we've never seen it done before. Get the universities involved. Don't just send a handful of people and experts down there to do an investigation. Engage thousands of them. Let's look at the data. And we have the resources throughout a consortium of universities, not just in this country, throughout the world, to help governments look at their public health data, look at their hospital data, and try to do some interpretation and analysis on that. We have the ability to do that. It's not being done right now, but it's really important. So why, at the moment, what we've got, increased number of cases of Zika virus. We're hearing reports, increased number of reports of microcephaly or babies born with small-sized heads. When the Brazilians experts have gone back and looked at that, a lot of them have been misdiagnosed. We haven't seen microcephaly or babies born with small-sized heads outside of Brazil in any of the other 45 countries that have local transmission yet.
Simple question, but the word Zika, where does it come from?
It comes from a forest in Uganda. It's an amazing forest. It's called the Zika forest, and it's actually the Ugandan government has actually protected that forest.
Let's go to Eileen, who's joining us from Sunnyvale, California, with Dr. Macgregor-Skinner. Go ahead, Eileen.
Hi. Let's assume that you get the disease, and then after a couple of weeks you recover. I have two parts. One, are you at risk of passing on birth defects for the rest of your life? And two, assuming that you've gotten better, are you immune thereafter?
Great question, Eileen. And again, we know that from other diseases, and we've had experience, and we have a lot of science behind those other diseases, and including Zika. We've seen that within the Zika virus, you may have symptoms for 3 to 7 days. The majority of people will never have symptoms. They'll never know they've been infected by this virus. But those that do show symptoms, after about 7 to 10 days, they've gone away. We're now testing those patients that have recovered, and we've found that the virus is no longer in their blood. What makes this really challenging, though, is that if you'd asked me this a few weeks ago, I would have told you about one or possibly two case studies that we had where a man had been infected in a country where there was Zika and come back to an area where there was no Zika, and we'd found that the Zika virus was transmitted through the semen, transmitted sexually. And that was only one or two cases that we actually had. We're now looking at 14 cases here in the US alone where that could happen. So again, the virus is not in the blood. The person doesn't have any symptoms, but the virus has gone and hidden in the testicles, in the semen. And this is what we also learnt this about Ebola. And again, another study we're looking at the moment is there virus in breast milk? And what does that mean? And that's a study that's ongoing right now.
Let's go to Jeff from Norfolk, Virginia. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my question.
Sure.
It was very similar to the last caller's about, if you were infected and then you transmitted to your spouse and wanted to have a child in the future, is there a timeline when that would be safe again to try to conceive?
Yes, there is, Jeff. And again, even the number of pregnant women that we know about here in the US that have been exposed to the Zika virus, some of them have gone on to have very healthy babies. And again, we can do this. We can use ultrasound during pregnancy to diagnose how the baby is developing, what the size of the baby is, the size of the head. We know that even babies that are born with a mild case of microcephaly go on and lead very normal lives. Babies that have severe microcephaly, they may need a program in place to support them for a very long time in their development. So we now know that, and the advice has come out with this new information on sexual transmission, either don't have sex or wear a condom. If your spouse or your wife is already pregnant, then make sure throughout her pregnancy you always wear a condom. You don't want her exposed to semen. And they're the guidance that's come out again on such websites like the Centre for Disease Control. But again, they're getting that information out there to people. If you've travelled down to any of these countries and you're coming back, then just wear a condom. That makes more sense. Again, the time period, we're looking at it. It's only a few months. It's about 3 months at the moment. We assume and we believe that you can go and start making babies again.
This is from JJJ saying, what changed the Zika virus from that of a previous generation and how it moved to Brazil, and could change have been purposeful?
Oh, JJ, that's a great question. And again, we had an outbreak. Well, there was an outbreak in an island called a country called French Polynesia, and another island called the YAP, Y-A-P, back in about 2013. we're now retrospectively looking at the data from French Polynesia, and we're now seeing that, yes, some of the patients that were infected with Zika virus in French Polynesia had Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is another thing that we're seeing, a neurological problem we're seeing with the Zika virus. And also there were some babies on French Polynesia born with microcephaly, but none of them really went on to have severe microcephaly. So previous outbreaks that we've seen in Africa, Asia, and some of the other South Pacific islands, we've never seen anything like this, and this is what makes this one extraordinary.
We have a minute left. Quick question from Stan in Victoria, Texas. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. Good morning. What I would like to say is we've had the mosquito for thousands of years, thousands, and we've not yet figured out how to kill them.
Your response?
Well, no, we haven't, Sam, we haven't worked out how to kill them. There's probably about 3,500 different species of mosquitoes. We're concerned at the moment of Aedes aegypti, or Aedes species mosquito that carries dengue, chikungunya, yellow fever, and Zika. The Culex species of mosquito that carries West Nile virus, the Anopheles species that carries malaria. What we do have a comprehensive integrated mosquito management program that we've used here in the US for dengue fever outbreaks to reduce the number of mosquitoes, and we've broken transmission of diseases. We're good at doing that. We're good at doing that for malaria. Wiping them out? No. But controlling the transmission? Yes, we're good at that.
And very briefly, we've had a number of tweets along these lines, including this from John. Could there be a link between the Zika virus and windmills?
No.
Dr. Gavin Macgregor-Skinner, who is an expert on infectious disease, and he is the Global Projects Manager for the Elizabeth R. Griffin Foundation here in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Steve.
We will continue the conversation tomorrow morning on C-SPAN's Washington Journal, talking politics and Super Tuesday. Also, the situation in Flint, Michigan. Among our guests tomorrow morning will be Mark Edwards. He is at Virginia Tech and a member of the Flint Water Interagency Coordinating Committee. We'll also talk with Mike DeBonis, congressional reporter for the Washington Post, about the Senate and its debate over a Supreme Court vacancy, likely to hear the president's nominee in the next few weeks. And Aaron Mehta, who's with Defense News, to talk about Your Money, our Monday segment, focusing on $350 billion for U.S. nuclear arsenal. That's tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 4 o'clock for those of you on the West Coast. Newsmakers is next. A reminder, our campaign coverage continues today, tomorrow, and on Super Tuesday. Thanks for joining us on this Sunday. Hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Have a great week ahead.